Great. We'll give it a couple of minutes to have folks filter in. Good afternoon. I guess good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on wherever everyone is in the world today. Good time zone. Yeah, I like that. Got folks from Toronto. Tom, you're from California, correct?
Yep, I'm near Los Angeles.
Amazing. Did you get to see any of the eclipse yesterday?
We got the glasses. I saw the partial, so we were maybe 50% coverage here. So
Amazing. I feel very lucky. I live in Montreal and we got to experience totality, which was incredible.
nice.
All right. Hello from Mexico, Toronto, ATL. Hello, hello. All right, well, I'll go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining, everyone, and welcome everyone to our AVG Pre-Apprenticeship Speaker Series. My name is Sarah. I'm BRIC's Director of Communications and your moderator for today. This speaker series from the BRIC Foundation aims to provide early awareness and education about all the exciting careers that exist across animation, visual effects, and gaming. And for those who may not know BRIC, we are a nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing representation across entertainment, gaming, media, and tech. Today, we have a super amazing presentation all about games and game design by industry pro Tom Smith, followed by an audience Q&A towards the end of the session. So be sure to use that Q&A box to submit any of your questions along the way. Tom has been making games for over 25 years. After a brief stint in board games, he's worked on console games, handheld games, PC games, mobile games, educational games, assessment games, and just about anything else you can think of. He's helped with Where's My Water at Disney, Conan at THQ, and Match 3 games at Zynga, just to name a few. And currently he works at Roblox, encouraging the growth of educational games on that platform, and teaches a class on games at Moorpark College. So I think it's safe to say we're in very good hands today. So Tom, feel free to take it away.
Hi, yeah, I thank you for the wonderful introduction. I appreciate that, and I'm happy to be here with BRIC and support the good work they do. As stated, I've worked on a lot of different types of games over my careers. These are all games I've worked on. This is just a small sample, but it, yeah, ranges from board games to console games to handheld games to mobile games, educational games, everything. So, and at a lot of great companies at Disney and THQ and companies all over the country. So, right now I'm working at Roblox. I'm here speaking for myself, not for Roblox, but I make these weird assessment games that are really interesting and strange, and we use them as part of the hiring process to evaluate people's cognitive skills. So really interesting, unique problems, but I'm not going to focus on those today because they're a very small segment of the industry. What I want to focus on today is just talking about what it's like to work in the games industry, and really, what are the sorts of things that you do, what are the sorts of roles that exist, and just, how does that whole thing work? And I'm really, all of these roles that I've worked on before, I've worked as a game designer. So that's my specific perspective, but I'm happy to talk about other roles. I've worked with artists and programmers and producers and everyone. So I just kind of want to give you a sense of all of that, because there's a lot of different ways to get into the games industry and a lot of different types of things you can make. So I want to kind of give a sense of all of that. So let's start with the what. I like to talk about like really basic questions about, what is a game? Because game is one of those words that we use a lot and everyone understands, but everyone might use a little bit differently. So I think, we can all agree most of what we're here to talk about are video games. They're kind of where the industry is today. And that's what a lot of people are really excited about, which is great. And that includes, PC games, console games, games like games on Roblox that are on the web, All of those, I think everyone would basically include. And then, mobile games, other digital games, also pretty easy to add into that category. But sometimes, and I forgot my own slide. I just want to emphasize too, if you are thinking about a career in the industry, mobile games are where the industry is these days. Like if you look at the numbers, roughly half, more than half of the money spent on games in the past few years has been on mobile or tablet or Android, iOS, whatever. So if you're playing, PC games or console games, you're in the minority. Candy Crush and Clash Royale and those sort of games are where a lot of the industry is these days. So if you're interested in getting in the industry, I definitely want you to be thinking about these spaces, up and coming spaces like VR or Roblox or Fortnite or things. There's a lot of new things coming. But when you're thinking about that, it's easy to forget the old. So games also include board games and card games and games that go back thousands of years. I mean, games have always been a part of the human experience. People like games. We just haven't really thought about them as robustly as we have in the past 50 or so years. And some of that is video games are making people think about it a lot more. And some of it is just people are exploring new things. And there's a whole like academic field called ludology that thinks about how games work and why people love games so much. And it's really kind of fascinating coming out of anthropology and psychology and economics even. So a bunch of interesting stuff there. And then there's even other types of games, traditional games, sports are games. We don't think about that all the time, but like if you're playing basketball, you're playing a game. If you're, making up a game with other kids on the playground, it's still a game. It's a sign of how universal the experience of a game is. Every culture in the world has had games of some sort, and sometimes they're, just things that kids play, and sometimes they're things that are central to the whole, cultural perspective of who they are as a people. So we've got all these different types of games and more. I could talk about that for a while, but I think you get the idea. So I really want to speak to the whole diversity of it, but I want to focus, career-wise, most of it's happening on the left side of the screen where you've got the digital games. And then that helps us start to build the definition of what games are. One of the most important things about what a game is versus everything else is games are interactive. Games are stories that you can play. Games are experiences where you are participating and your actions matter. Your actions can change the outcome. And that's really important. So if you're thinking about how to make a good game, you want to think about how the player does something and how the player interacts with the space. And you can see that in all the games that I've been showing you so far. These games have you moving and attacking and building. And those are very sort of common words that you see when you think about what players do and where they make choices in games. And so there's a lot of different ways to do this. And even within the same word, moving in one game can be very different than moving in another. But that's kind of where the game all starts. That's what makes it a game versus a movie or a book or something. And so, yeah, movies and books kind of fall apart here. Like this is where games have unique qualities that make them stand apart from other types of media, is that the distinguishing quality is that games are interactive. Games are also very structured. Games are very organized, and games follow rules. Rules are really important. And so this helps players understand what's going on. And within the game, only the rules of the game really matter, which is a whole interesting question too. There's a magic circle. We could talk about that for a while, but we're not going to go too deep on that today. So within the game follows the rules and everything makes sense within those rules. And you can see that with all these, even the video games follow rules, but with a board game, they're printed on a booklet that you read that make it very clear. And this is a big advantage games have over reality. So games, I think, have an advantage over TV and books when they, sorry about that, when they have the interactivity, but they have an advantage over reality and they're structured. A lot of people play games because they like having something where the rules actually work, as opposed to reality where you're told the rules one day and they might be different the next day. And then finally, the other really important thing with games is fun. And I'm not going to try to define fun. Fun is a really complex word that is hard to really understand. But at its heart, games are play. Games are something we do because we enjoy them. They're not something we do because we have to. Games are kind of inherently entertainment. And you can use it for other things, but you're using it for other things plus entertainment. So, and another thing that we sometimes forget thinking about video games is that games are inherently social. Until video games started appearing, games were always social. You would play, card games or board games with people. And video games are, coming back to it with online games and other forms of ways to play together. But we're kind of in a unique spot right now where solo play is almost more common than group play. And that's kind of, weird and interesting by itself. So every game gets at fun in a different way. Sometimes you get fun by achieving things. Sometimes you get fun by expressing yourself. Sometimes you get social fun where the fun is because you're playing with other people. So there's a lot of different ways that games can empower people and make them, have a good, joyous moment in a day that might otherwise be kind of boring. So this is another place where games beat reality. A lot of the reasons people play games is because they're escaping from reality and they don't want to deal with something and they just want to have a moment to themselves where they can just have fun. So escapism can be problematic for some people, but generally it's good. Generally people need that moment and then they come back to reality refreshed and ready to face the problems of the actual reality. When I put a big no sign over reality, it doesn't mean I hate reality. I love reality. It's wonderful, but games have advantages over reality in some ways. So to look at this definition another way, games are making decisions based on rules to have fun. And you do that by overcoming a challenge to achieve a goal using your imagination. So, decisions, games are about putting you in spaces and letting you decide what to do. Minecraft's a great example of that. Rules, like we said, there's consistent, predictable, understandable rules. These are my rules I wrote for Settlers of Catan. I'm proud of those. And you're doing that to have fun. You're doing that to either by yourself or with other people to enjoy yourself. And to do that, you have to have a challenge, which might seem kind of counterintuitive, but there's actually interesting psychology on this of how humans really want to be challenged. They don't want to just sit around and do nothing. They want to be pushed. They want to demonstrate that they can do things more so than just sit around and do nothing. Doing nothing is boring. Games are not boring. And games always set you a goal. Games give you something to do towards something. You can find some examples like Minecraft where the goal isn't very explicit, where the game kind of lets you make your own goal, but there's still a goal that happens. And all of this is happening inside your head. Games are imaginary. Games are pretend. And that's kind of necessary. Like if you look at this definition, the presidential election fits most of these rules. It's making a decision based on rules, not to have fun, but to overcome a challenge and achieve a goal. There's a lot of things that are game-like, but aren't a game because they're not pretend, they're not imaginary. And you can really turn anything into a game if you just think about it the right way. Doing dishes can be a game, but it's not something we normally think about as a highly professional game. So how do you do this? And who does this? When you're making a game, there's lots of companies involved, and you can, look at which companies own which and how their business deals are set up, but that's not this talk. This talk is not really meant to be about business. This is more about the people who are doing the work and making the games. And those are, we call them game developers. And the game developers, as opposed to the publisher or the marketing teams or whatever, there's a sort of kind of standard jobs that do this. And so it's the programmer, the artist, the game designer, and the producer are what I would normally consider the core game development team. And that's not to say there's not a bunch of other people. QA people, sound and music, writing, all these other types of roles are important to the game process, but they're a smaller percentage of the industry, and some games don't necessarily have them. You can do a game with very simple sound, and you might not hire a whole expert who composes music for you and sets every sound value and sets every sound effect. Those people are great, and they're really useful on a lot of games, but there are games that will get by without them. So I do want to encourage, if you're thinking about a role in the industry, don't just think of the four that I'm going to talk about for the rest of my examples. Look around, see all these sort of interesting side roles that exist as well. There's a lot of people that are required to make a video game, and all those roles are valuable. I don't want to imply that some of these are less, less game developers than anyone else. Oh, and sorry, I should call out QA tester. QA tester is often the entry-level role, one of the few entry-level roles that exist. it's a terrible, horrible job. You don't get to just sit around and play games all day. You have to do the same actions over and over again and find ways to break the game. So it's a terrible, horrible way, but it's often the easiest and best way in the industry. If you're going to get a QA role, though, make sure you're working with the developers. Like if you're sitting next to the programmer and you can offer to help him or the artist or whoever, that's a way to get in the industry. If you're in a different building and you never get to talk to anyone, it can be a start. And honestly, I know people who do have a wonderful life as a QA tester. QA leads who know what they're doing are beloved at every company that they exist at. So it's not necessarily you don't necessarily have to be sitting next to the person and move into a different role, but there's a lot of different types of QA roles, and make sure you're getting a good one if that is your goal. So programmers, programmers are the people that make the game work. They write code, and they are the foundation upon which, nothing else would exist without code. And so, a good programmer is spending their day creating new things out of nothing and solving problems and coming up with new and interesting ways to structure systems and, really highly technical, highly skilled, highly focused people. And there's a lot of different ways that you can be a programmer. You can be a generalist. You can just write the game from beginning to end, but you can also focus on specific things. And a bigger game, especially a big console game, will have people who just focus on, all I do is I code the combat system and I make the animations sync up right, or there's very specific roles. You can be a back-end programmer who makes the sort of servers and multiplayer and communication and matchmaking and all that work. And so the smaller team you're at, the more generalist, the more general your skills will be used. But at the bigger teams, might be highly specialized, focusing on one specific thing. And that's fine. Some people prefer working at the smaller places. Some people prefer working at the bigger places. It's really just a personal choice. Artists make all the stuff you see in the games. So if there's a character or a chair or a car or a world, they'd make the trees, they'd make the grass, they'd make the squirrels running around in the background. And they set it up so that you see it, that it moves, that it animates correctly, that visual effects appear and it glows and shines and the lights and all the things that you see. And a lot of this means that artists are generally very creative people. They're generally people who are very good at understanding emotion and mood, because a lot of the tone and feel of the game are coming from the visuals and also the sound. So the people who are really good at those things are good at not just executing and technically creating something, but really understanding how that's going to evoke emotions and feelings in the people seeing it. And artist breaks down into a bunch of specific roles. So again, like programmers, if you're at a small company, you might do all of these things yourself. But if you're at a big company, you might just be the person who's rigging the models and taking the rough forms of the characters and adding joints and bones so that they move and that someone else can then animate it. You're not even doing the animation. You're just setting it up so that the polygons or pixels or whatever know that I move as one unit, I move as an arm, and somebody spends all day doing that. And then somebody animates that next, and then someone puts the textures on that and puts the lights on that. There's a lot of individual steps that have to be done. And if you're not doing it all yourself, you might just be doing one of those steps. And then a bunch of other variants of that as well. And there's overlaps too between the roles that I'm describing. So you can be a technical artist who works writing code for artists to use. And that's an interesting job that can be really, a lot of those crossover or sort of unexpected spaces are where some of the most interesting jobs are, where people are highly valued because they're doing something that not everyone else wants to do. If you're a programmer and you like working with sound, that's great because a lot of programmers don't understand it. If you're a programmer who has a good sense for how UI should look, also really great because a lot of programmers don't think about that. So finding your specialty is important. It's really hard to be a generalist who is a programmer and an artist and a game designer. It can be done. There's a few games that are single people, but it's a lot easier to focus in one. But then if you can focus in one and have some skills in the other and at least understand the other, that's really great. I'm a game designer. I'm not a programmer. I'm not an artist, but I've worked with them long enough. I understand their needs and their concerns. And that helps a lot. So I'm a game designer. This is my job. Game designers are the ones who make it fun. So they take all the things that everyone else has generated and put them together in fun ways. So like if I made Hunter the Reckoning was a game about zombies, and someone made the zombies have health and hit points. Someone else made the models that made, you could see what the zombies look like. I was the one who said, when you go into this room, there's 3 zombies, and these 3 zombies each take 4 hits to kill. If they attack you, it takes them 6 hits to kill you. And they move at this speed, and they attack this often, and all those sort of underlying numbers that make it fun, that provide a good flow of experience, where this room has 4 zombies, this room has 7, this room has 3, so you get a little break, and so on and so forth. That's game design. And this is kind of a newer field. When I started, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago, there weren't a lot of people doing this. And there are more people now, and it's become kind of more common in the industry, but I still have to explain to people who work in the industry what it is I do. And so a lot of, I'm using, showing you some examples here of the tools that people actually use. So this is, how people code. This is how artists build in Maya. And the tool I chose for game designers is a spreadsheet, because we spend a lot of time just adjusting numbers and making numbers work. Not every game designer lives in a spreadsheet, but a lot of them do. And so liking Excel is a bonus for a lot of game design roles. So, and as with everything else, you can specialize. You can focus on, I want to build the levels. I want to say exactly how the zombies work, or I want to build the systems. I want to say how the combat works in general and how the attacks flow from one to another. Or I want to work on the economic systems of the game and figure out how to make sure the player is getting enough money to buy the things they want. Or I want to work on more of the narrative side and work on world building and writing and stories and things like that, which crosses over into another whole field of writing, which is they're experts at just writing, but game design and writing often overlap a lot. So there's often a lot of communication back there, and there's narrative designers that just make sure the game design and the story are playing nicely together and interacting meaningfully, which is challenging in and of itself. And game designers write a lot of documents. So if you don't like writing or mapping things out, it's going to be hard to be a game designer. Not impossible. There are definitely game designers who don't do a lot of documentation, but it's generally going to be assumed that you're going to know how to write a concept doc, how to write a pitch, how to write a technical document for programmers to build off of. All these different things are generally primarily written by game designers. So being able to not just come up with great ideas, but being able to communicate them is important for game designers, and honestly for any of these roles. Every time, is this entirely true? Almost every time I've had a problem with a game, it's been because of communication. Somebody didn't mention that they were thinking something, someone had a vision in their head and couldn't get it out, and the rest of the team didn't know that that's what they were supposed to do, or didn't know that that was the goal. These are all really important, really hard problems, not just in games, but honestly in every job. Humans are great at communicating and also terrible at communicating. So game designers writing a bunch of documents to get the ideas out of their heads and give them to other people is really important. And then the final key role is producer. And producers are the people who check up on everybody else, who are making sure that the goals of the game are being met and that the schedule of the game is being met, and just make sure that everything happens. And producer can mean a lot of different things. It's a hard role to pin down. Every company does it a little bit differently, because the producer on a game could be the person who's just walking from desk to desk, checking that everyone's getting their tasks done. Or it could be the person who's doing the high-level business deals and setting the general tone and direction for the game at the beginning. And those are very different roles, but we kind of group those all in production. And depending on what company you're at or who you're talking to, they may have very different visions of what you mean when you say you're a producer or you're talking to a producer. So that's kind of true of all of these roles. There's a junior version and a senior version that are very different. But with producer, I think it becomes even more stark in that it may be the person running the company, or it may be the person getting coffee for the people who are doing the work. Or at some companies, that could be the same person. I usually like working at those companies. If you can get the CEO to be helping everybody else out, that's a good sign. And then this isn't a person, but I just wanted to call out the tools that we work with. when we're making a game, we're usually using an existing tool set. Nowadays, like when I started in the industry, we didn't have these and we had to build them ourselves every time. And it was a huge pain in the, thing I shouldn't say here because this is a polite video. But nowadays there's some really good tools out there. Unity and Epic and Roblox, where I work, make ways that you can build games very quickly and easily. And it's not always going to build exactly everything you want, but it's going to get you a foundation. It's going to start by having the physics and the rendering so that people can see the pixels that you create. And it'll have pre-made objects that you can just slap in really quickly. All of that is really important, and it makes it a lot easier to start a game. And then you'll end up making some changes to it and customizing it to fit the specific needs of your game by the end. But these tools, I just want to emphasize how great they are and how useful they are and how much I wish I had them 30 years ago, and they would have made my life easier back then. Okay, so that's kind of the key roles and a few of the bonus roles that are the people making the games. But I want to talk a little bit about the how too. And I want to emphasize that games are hard. Like making a video game is not easy, even for people like me who've been doing it for a while. Every game that comes out is a miracle. And some of them, come out and are still having problems. And, nowadays we can just do updates and patches and hopefully fix that. But it's not an easy thing to do, especially, video games require a lot of people and a lot of work. So I want to make sure that's very clear. And I want to explain a little bit of why. Part of why this is true is that games are these complicated systems. When you're an interactive thing, you want your actions, you want your choices to matter. So you want, when I do something here, I want it to affect things over here, and I want this to affect things over here. And there's these ripples that occur. So if I, if I beat an enemy in combat, I want to earn some gold that I can then use to buy better gear that then affects everything else, that then I can, so every action you take should have a meaningful effect. And that makes it complicated to understand. There's a lot of things going on. And this hits on a whole nother field. Systems thinking is something that people are really studying and thinking about now. This is a good book I recommend if you're interested in this. But systems affect a lot of our lives outside of games. Again, I could talk about that for a while, but the basic idea that games are systems, I think, is important to understand. But because they're systems, they're hard to predict. It's hard to know what's going to happen, next turn if you're playing a game. So imagine the game designer thinking about how, if they change the rules, how that will affect the players who are playing the game that doesn't even exist yet. So understanding everything about your game when it's just in your head is more or less impossible, because games need to be hard to predict. If it's easy to know what's going to happen in the game, it's not very fun. If you know everything before the game starts, then you're not going to enjoy it. So that's valuable as a player, but difficult as a game designer. So to solve this, as a game designer, you really need to play the game. And that there's sort of an inherent dilemma there, in that you can't play the game until it exists, but how do you know what to make before it exists? So you kind of need to start somewhere and then start putting early builds, early versions of the game in front of people as quickly as possible. So getting to something that is playable is really important. And then once you get it playable, you want to watch people play it. You want to play it yourself. You want to have other people on the team play it, but all of them, they know what they're doing. So you really want random people. So play tests are really important. Getting it in front of people who are like the people you're trying to make the game for. And don't give them any guidance. If you walk into a playtest and help them, then you're giving them benefits that the real players aren't going to get. Don't give your playtesters anything they're not going to get in the box or in the download for the game. But do ask them about what they experienced. It's really important to watch them and see what they do, because that's the most important thing. But asking them why they did it is also really important. So developing good playtest protocols, really important. And then iterating based on it. If you see something's wrong, fix it. If you ask the player how you should fix it, that's often going to be wrong. But if a player has a problem, they're always right. Like, as a game designer, anytime someone comes to you and suggests something, you have to take that seriously. You don't have to do it exactly the way they said. You might understand the game better than they do and understand how to fix it. But if they're saying, you should you should make these enemies have way fewer hit points because the combat, I was fighting them forever and it felt really, I got really bored. The problem there is that they got really bored. So you have to figure that out and solve that, whether that's through changing how many combats they have or how the player's attacks work or how the enemy attacks work or whatever it is. Them telling you to reduce the hit points on the enemy, not that important. But them telling you that they were bored, that is important. So iterating intelligently is really important and can be hard. So to make this easier and to make this happen quicker, you want to build prototypes. You want to get to your answers as quickly as possible. So you want to build whatever it takes to get to that answer. If you're making mobile games, printing things on a piece of paper, sketching them out on a piece of paper can help you understand your user interface really quickly. When I'm building digital games, I'll often do paper prototypes where I'll build a board game based on the same ideas, where I can see how players are making their decisions, even if I can't see all the buttons they would be pressing and all the animations they would see. But I can still get to the underlying thinking. And you can build, really quickly in some of the tools that exist now. So you can build, paper prototypes, but in Roblox or Unity or something that provide those same answers. Because your goal there is just to get to your answer as quickly as you can. Okay, so if that's how you make games, how do you make good ones? And there's a few key things you want to understand about your game in order to make it good. So you want to understand your core loop. And this is really where the game starts. This is the thing the player does the most. These are the actions, the interactions that define the game and define how the game works. And so for all the games we talked about before, you can look and kind of see where this is. So for an MMO like World of Warcraft, you're moving and you're attacking things and you're doing that to complete quests. And when you complete quests, you go back and you get another one and you do it again. And there's a whole upgrade system. So you could argue if that should be part of that. But there's this really simple loop of actions the player can take, moving and attacking, to completing quests. Paperboy 64 was an N64 game I worked on. And in there, the core loop was moving on a bike in a very specific sort of way and throwing newspapers in order to deliver the papers to people. You also had, enemies and threats you had to avoid or to throw things at to get points. But the core of the game was moving and throwing to deliver the papers. Clash Royale, building units to attack, and the rest of it's kind of automated for you, but really it's deciding what units to build and when to build them. Settlers of Catan is, gathering resources and spending the resources to get more resources, which is a very common economic loop. A lot of board games are, I get stuff so I can spend them to get more stuff. Monopoly is I get money so I can buy houses, so I can get more money, so I can buy more houses, so on and so forth. Basketball, moving into position to shoot the ball into a goal. You could kind of argue that's the same as Paperboy or an MMO because you're moving and attacking or moving and performing an action, but obviously in a very different way. Basketball is not Paperboy, is not World of Warcraft. And Foursquare, is again kind of the same, moving and positioning and hitting something, but you're doing it with different constraints. You have to worry about the squares and hitting in the right space. So it can be very similar cores, but the nuances are what makes it important. And those are important to understand about your own game. And then once you've got a core, then you have to add some variety. You don't want the game to be the same every time. If it's the same every time, I'll play it a few times and then I'll put it away and never bother again. You want players to come back and enjoy it over and over again. So you got to give them that over and over again. And you can do that through content. You can do that by just having new stuff. So, the first time I play, I'm on level 1. And then when I get to level 30, it's new enemies and new arrangements of things. You can also do that with more randomization, and dice or randomization in any way is a great way to keep things fresh and varied. So, when I'm playing a simple card game, if I'm playing, poker doesn't have different levels, but the cards come out differently every time. And that's what makes it different, provides that variety. So, looking at the games that I was bringing up before, some games do it through content. So MMOs and Paperboy just have content that you go through. You go through new quests, you go through new levels. With Clash Royale, they're different units, although they also let you mix and match them however you want. So that creates new combinations, which is great. Settlers of Catan has randomization through dice and cards. It also has players, and players behave differently. When you're playing with other people, that provides some nice variety. And so like basketball, a lot of the variation is players, and they have different skills, they have different skill levels, and then the physics also create this not exactly randomization, but it feels like randomization, unpredictability to the result. And then Foursquare is nice because it has special rules. So if you want to call round the world or something, you can modify the rules as you go and add as much variety as you want. And that gets you to your core of your game, but then you want to understand how people are going to interact with it. You want to understand your players. A lot of the role of a game designer in the early days, especially, is they hopefully have the game in their head and they can picture what the game's going to be like. And if they're good at it, they can not only picture how they're going to play the game, but how other people are going to play the game. Because often you're making a game for someone who isn't yourself. If you're making it for yourself, it's a little easier because you can kind of picture how you would play it. But often you're making a game for, people who might be going through a different place in their lives, or they might be just going through a different place in their day. I mean, if I'm making a mobile game, I might make it for people who are, just waiting at the office or waiting on the train or waiting at the grocery store and just want to waste a few minutes. I can't really simulate that in my life when I'm playing the game for pretend. So I have to kind of think about what it would be like for them to play it. And that's important too. When you're thinking about your player, don't just think about their demographics. It's not about what age they are and what gender they are and all that. It's about their motivations. Like, what do they want? What are their emotions? What do they enjoy? Those are the things you want to think about your player. And some of that will cross over with demographics. I mean, teenage males often like the same things, but not always. So it can be a way to shorthand those emotions, but really make sure you're thinking about the emotions as well. And so all of our games get at these players in different ways. Players who like certain things, players who really get joy out of certain actions. Some of these are more intellectual challenge. Some of these are more physical challenge. Some of these are, rewarding players who are clever versus players who are just lucky. And those are all, valid ways of achieving a game. As a game designer, you want to think about, how do I get the player to have this feeling? And so you want to create a challenge that makes them feel rewarded for the types of thinking that they want to do or the types of actions they want to do. And then a really important thing, and this is maybe getting too specific here, but it's something that can get lost, and it's so important, is the first time player experience. That first experience is going to shape how people see your game, and it's so easy to get wrong. People like to do these long tutorials that are really like lecturing and boring and just putting up text and pressing button and not really like helping the player experience the game the way they should. These are all really hard, and a good game will do it less so with just tutorial text that's telling you what to do and more just as part of the experience. So a lot of the teaching in games, and especially the digital games, is happening in the levels. So it's less about getting the player, the first experience is going to be getting the player the basics they need about how to move and how to attack. But a lot of the depth of the game is going to come from experiencing it. And the quicker you can get the player to actually experiencing it, the better. The quicker you can get them in the game and trying things out, that's where they're really going to learn. Because I believe learning is a playful experience. And that's how people really absorb information, is by poking at it and trying different things and seeing what happens. And games are great for that, but you have to set up your game in the right way so that happens. And games that have, different enemies or different units you can use are good for that, because you get the chance to kind of try different things and mix them up in your own way. And then the last thing that I think is important to really understand your game and make your game good is understanding your theme. Oh, and I forgot to change these words. Okay, whatever. Let's pretend there are better words there. But the theme is what the game is about. Is what is your game saying about the world? What is your game making the player think about? What is the game? What are the narrative themes? What are the visual themes? What are the just underlying things the player has to do? And what makes the player a little different when they come out at the end of the game? And this is sometimes it's something that the games are built around. I don't think I would argue that any of these games are built around a theme, but sometimes it's just something that happens along the way. But if you can understand this, it helps make a lot of the other decisions in the game. I think, Clash Royale is an interesting game, and I think a lot of that comes from, you get to kind of express yourself through building your own little army. And they all have little personalities, and that makes it feel like it's really more of a personal interaction. But the places where the game really shines are where it embraces that, like, I get to build my own army idea and runs with it. I think, sports, a lot of sports are really about teamwork and working together. And I think that's a great theme. And that's something that I think you can look at different sports and see. I would argue that the sports that embrace that more are the sports that are better, and the sports that people embrace more, that are more popular and beloved. So understanding what your game is about at a deep level can really help you make decisions about what rules to use and what interactions to use and what abilities to use. And wrapping up, I just want to emphasize games are important. People really like games. Our brains are kind of trained to be used to games, and rules are something that we really resonate with us. And being able to do all this in a space of imagination and joy is something that really makes things better. There's a whole movement to gamify more of people's lives, and that's partially just an acknowledgement that games really work. Games are something that humans really like. And you can use this in a lot of different ways. One of the things I'm doing at Roblox is helping build educational games that use all the things that we've talked about to help people understand. In the case of the game on the top right there is Code Combat, where it's helping you learn how to code by playing a game. You get to tell your fish or other pet how to move by doing some simple coding. And that's a really engaging way to get people to learn and get people to play with it. But you can also use it for other things. The game on the bottom here is Papers, Please, which is a wonderful game that, as you dig at it, it's really about empathy. It's a game that teaches you to put yourself in someone else's shoes and think about their problems and how they're balancing things on their own, and they're dealing with their own struggles. And, they might try to reach out and help someone, but at a cost to themselves, and how difficult that is. And just having those sort of conversations and thoughts and really processing that is a wonderful thing that a game can do. So games can be about more than just fun. That doesn't mean they're not fun, but they can do more than that. And I think that's a wonderful thing that we're going to see more of going forward. I think people are realizing that this is a great way, because humans love games. They can use games in lots of different ways. But that's not the only way games matter. Games matter because they make people happy. They're fun. They're art. They are something that says something about who we are as humans. And I think that in and of itself, even without all the other benefits, is important. So if you like games, feel good about it and make games that make people happy. And I don't think that's a bad thing. So that is my talk. I'm now ready to answer some exciting questions from everyone here.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the great presentation, Tom.
Thanks.
There are so many things and aspects about games that definitely I have learned through this presentation.
Great.
All right. So I see we have a couple of Q&As or questions here submitted. The first one is from an anonymous attendee who says, "Hello, I am a project manager specializing in VFX and currently seeking opportunities within the gaming industry. I have experience working with a small team on VR games, but despite applying for positions at larger gaming companies, I have not received any responses. I'm curious about the potential reasons behind this lack of response. Additionally, as someone familiar with management in media companies, but new to gaming pipelines, I'm eager to learn about any suggestions or lessons that could help me transition successfully into the gaming industry. Thank you very much."
Yeah, great question. I apologize on behalf of my industry. We're often not very good at communicating outward when there's a hiring process going on. I don't understand it. Whenever I hire, I always talk to people, but a lot of people don't. So sorry about that. It's also a really hard time in the industry right now. There's a lot of people who've been laid off. So it might just be that it's a rough time, and coming from another industry is going to be a little harder than looking at resumes for people who are already in the industry. And then to improve your odds going forward, I think you have the right skills. I think someone who is used to managing VFX projects is going to have the same skills that are needed to manage a game development project. It's just going to be finding someone who sees that and who is ready to take a chance on someone switching industries. So I think demonstrating that you're passionate about games is going to help. I think people would love to see that you're interested in the types of games they make, especially. Whenever you're interviewing for a game company, always play their games and have thoughts about their games. So you demonstrate that you understand the sorts of things they make. And yeah, I'm trying to think of any other like solid advice. I think most of what I'm coming up with is general getting a job advice that you're probably already familiar with. So I think, yeah, but I do think game companies, especially the smaller ones, like passion. So if you can demonstrate that you are excited about their games, that'll help resonate with them.
That's great advice, Tom. That also leads me to another question, actually, that I think would be helpful for this audience is understanding what are some of those soft skills or essential skills, especially as someone who might be, in high school right now, or early college, who may not have access to a game design course necessarily. What are some of those essential skills that they can start developing at this stage?
I mean, the biggest is communication. So being able to work in small projects with people. And, that means working in small projects with people you don't like too. Like if you've got some annoying guy in your project that doesn't always get his work done, that's an experience you're going to have in your professional career as well. And being able to manage it and deal with it and still achieve good results is important. I do think there are certain things that are hard to learn outside of completing a game project. Like when you take an idea from nothing to it has shipped and people I don't know are playing it, there's a lot of things that are just learnings along the way that are hard to get otherwise. But you can get them even outside of a dedicated game program if you go to some game jams, like participate in some online projects with people. Building small projects will get you a lot of learnings that will help build those soft skills, and you'll be able to see things from the perspective that the game developers are seeing things, and that's really important. And that's, like I said, really hard to fully absorb until you've kind of been through it yourself and gone, oh, now I see why everyone complains about feature creep, or I see why everyone complains about having to kill their good ideas, or all these, or the importance of playtesting. I mean, I can talk about it, but you really don't, it doesn't become part of your soul until you've lived through the consequences a few times.
Great. All right, we've got another question here, and apologies if I mispronounce your name, from Kaidesh Forrester, who says, hey, I'm a graphic design and psychology student right now with skills in UX/UI and illustration, and I actually just finished designing a card game prototype for a project in class. Ooh, congratulations.
Nice.
How would you recommend meshing these skills when focusing on making portfolio pieces to get a foothold in the video game industry? So I guess a larger question attached to that too, Tom, is what makes a successful game design portfolio, perhaps?
Yeah, as a game designer, like portfolios are often your resume of like, I want to see the games more than I want to see portfolio pieces per se. For an artist, portfolio pieces are key. And it's also, I think my sense is for artists, a lot of it's too is understanding what was your work versus what was general work across the project. And for a game designer, you often have to just talk to that. You can't just put a screenshot of something you built, and it doesn't make sense to people if you just look at this room full of zombies. I decided how many zombies were there. It doesn't really make sense. But that said, for where you are, I would say, yeah, if you can find projects that are UI based, I think a lot of UI is easily transferable. If you can put together a portfolio that shows some really elegantly clean, nicely designed UI, game people should understand that, even if it's not a piece of game work. And then having things like a card game, honestly, like I might be old school. I don't know if everyone would agree with this, but I would love to, like, I've had people bring out card games during during an interview, and I consider that to be, actual work experience that is valuable, especially if we can sit and play it and I can critique it, and they'll listen to the critique and have good feedback and, tell me why things are the way they are. It's like I said, it's happened. I've had that experience, and I don't think I hired the guy, but not for that reason. So, yeah.
All right. We have a question here from Lizette who asks, what beginner softwares would you recommend if I wanted to begin my own mobile game? I know, Tom, you had listed, I think you had mentioned Unity, Epic.
Yep.
Were there any others as well?
Well, obviously Roblox, but not as good for
Yes.
its own thing. Um, Honestly, I say that for real. I work there, and that makes me a little biased, but I do think it's a good engine for especially multiplayer games. You want to be using, I mean, honestly, a lot of the tools don't matter. So as long as you're building something and getting a result, um, people I work with use Blender to make 3D models. That's a free software that works. Um, I think I don't know. I use GIMP for just basic image editing. I think my artists use better things than that. But I've worked at places where, just the free software that exists out there is going to be enough to get you started. And yeah, to build the whole game, something like Unity or Unreal, or Roblox is really a good place to start because it'll do a lot of the basics for you, and then you can focus on what makes your game interesting. And that's really important. But in terms of other like uh artists tools and all that, um use whatever you have access to, and if you can make something good in one software package, you'll be able to figure out how to make it in another, and most companies understand that.
Great. All right. If there are any other questions that folks have, please feel free to add it to the box. We've reached the end of the Q&As for now, but Tom, is there anything else that you wanted to add, especially for this group?
um One thing I was going to mention and I didn't, I kind of alluded to, but like, if you're interested in jobs in the industry, think about it from different angles. Somebody makes the tools I just described. Roblox is a game company at which I'm one of the few people there making games. We're mostly making tools. That's a way to get in the games industry. There's a company that just makes trees. They have a program that randomly generates trees. And so for a game like Skyrim, that's wonderful because you want to walk around and feel like you're in an actual forest, not just in the same tree copied and pasted so many times. Somebody's job in the industry is making trees. Somebody, there's games journalists, there's game educators, there's people who think about games in all sorts of different ways. You don't have to be the programmer to be part of the games industry. And if you're really desperate for a job, get a job being the IT guy at the company and then offer to help out. There's more ways in the industry than just QA. QA is sort of the standard way, but almost everyone I know in the industry has a unique story on how they got in and got started. And don't once you're in, it's so much easier to get a second job than to get a first. So anything, and when you're looking at your first job, don't be too picky. I do strongly encourage people to shop around for companies because some companies are definitely better than others. If your company plans on more than a few weeks of crunch every year, then you could find a better company. There are better companies. But for your first job, you might need to take one at a company that isn't exactly the sorts of games you like, doesn't have exactly the work policies you like, something. But it's a very hard industry to get in. It's a very competitive industry. So get that first job however you can, and then you'll be in a much better position to start shopping around.
Amazing. I think that's incredible advice to end on, Tom. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Happy to be here.
All right. Just to let folks know, we do have another pre-apprenticeship speaker series happening at the end of this month on the 30th, which is all about world building when it comes to game design. So if you're interested in that aspect of gaming careers, definitely feel free to register for that speaker series event as well. For those who might be already experienced in the world of game design, we also are launching BRIC's digital badging program, which allows you to show off your verifiable skills in the industry to industry recruiters as well. We have an info session happening for that this upcoming April 25th. So be sure to look out for that on our BRIC social media pages to RSVP. And we can also drop that link in the chat as well, so you have. But Tom, thank you so much for your time. It was so fantastic to learn about all the different aspects of games and careers that exist in games, from building trees to being a producer to actually building the art and the games and the rules around all the wonderful games that exist. So thank you so much again for your time. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we hope to see you on the next one.
Thank you so much, Tom. Great to have you here.
Thanks. Bye.